don't like my presentations to go off in a certain direction when I have a certain agenda I want to cover, but I'm going to leave a lot of time for questions at the end. So we'll do that. Second of all, I can't tell you, I've been interested in Arthur Szyk for almost 20 years, but I knew about Arthur Szyk 15 years before that. When I was looking for gifts for people in my wedding party, I found inexpensive reproduction copies of Arthur Szyk's Haggadah at the bookstore of Block Publishing in New York. I bought those books for $18 a copy, and I gave them to everybody in my wedding party. Then I was a rabbi for about 13 years, and really never thought about Arthur Szyk. Well, the truth of the matter is that as a rabbi, I never really had time to think. I was always so busy. But after I left the rabbinate, and I entered the antiquarian book world, the rare book world, which is how I've made my living over the past 27 years, I rediscovered Arthur Szyk's art, and I was off and running. So I can tell you more about that world in the question and answer period if anyone has interest, but I want to get to Arthur Szyk's art. The other thing that's really important to me is that because I've been at this for so long, I want you to know how much it means to me to have the opportunity to be able to speak with you, because you're going to be agents of Arthur Szyk. You're going to be representatives of his. You're going to be interfacing with the public and talking with people who never heard about Arthur Szyk. Which brings me to the question about, before you heard about this exhibit at all, how many people here had ever heard of Arthur Szyk? Can you raise? Oh my gosh, that's a much higher percentage than any group. Well, you're more, you're into the Jewish world more, and but very few people really, despite how famous Arthur Szyk was during his lifetime, and I mean really famous, worldwide, not just in America, and I'll talk about that later, very few people remember who he was and what he did. And so there's been a resurgence of interest in his art over the past couple of decades, and I've been integrally involved with that. So the opportunity to take what I've learned and amassed and to pass on to you and to make you the experts on Arthur Szyk is, I couldn't be happier. That's my job. So if there's everything that I know I can give to you, that's what I want to do. So that's my objective, and that's what I'm going to try to do in my presentation this morning, which I've called after the name of the exhibition, Arthur Szyk and the Art of the Haggadah. So as you look at this first image, something's striking you. There's something going on here that you wouldn't find in most Haggadot. Almost all of them are not going to be doing this. And what is going on in that initial image that's a little unusual? A little unusual. Well, what's a little unusual, and don't be afraid to be wrong and stuff, that's how we're, but what's going on here and why I chose it is because exactly what Szyk is trying to do in his Haggadah. He's moving history. He's moving events. He's taking what took place in the past and he's bringing it into the present, because the messages of the past are very much in the present, and certainly given the human condition likely to be there in the future as well. The Exodus, of course, is about the ancient Israelites leaving Egypt. Here you have European Jews whom Szyk has placed within the Passover narrative who are leaving Egypt, because it's a narrative that's unfolding in its own time. I will tell you, I have 4 different talks on the Haggadah that I give, so this one has been made for you, because that's why it's called the docent one. And I hope that it works. So I'm going to give it my very, very best shot.
Do you want to put the lights lower a little bit? Do you want a presentation?
Yeah, turn the lights down and people can still be able to write and see. And that's great. Just a little bit lower. Now, as lower as you want to go. How's that? Is that good? Oh, is that too much? That's too much. Okay, it's good, better. So, Arthur Szyk was an artist who continuously repeated the phrase that art is not my aim, it's my means. And during this presentation, there are 2 components that are going to help show you why I believe that this is the greatest Haggadah that's ever been created, and I hope that I can make that point to you. Then you'll judge that, but it's the combination of both the message that Szyk is attempting to deliver, the messages he's attempting to deliver, and the great art that is used to attract your attention to those images. And both of them combined will help raise the level of this Haggadah to those which would be in very rarefied territory, because this is not, for years, people have looked at this book and said, wow, look how beautiful the artwork is. Look how beautiful it is. It's just so stunning. But the layers and layers of messages that are found in his artwork are what really helps to raise this to a level of a book that has something to say to us in every generation. So that's what I want to get to today. And also, you know, that words are the commentary. Szyk uses his art to be a visual commentary. That's how he tells you what he wants you to know. Not by anything that he's writing. It's by the commentary that comes through in his art. That's what an illuminator does. An illuminator is one who illuminates a text. It takes the text and enlightens us by commenting on the text. And there are those who considered Arthur Szyk the greatest, when he was alive, the greatest illuminator since the 16th century. Working in the style of the 16th century miniaturist painters, Szyk was recognized as likely the greatest in over 400 years. So the purpose, the presentation that I have will be divided into 11 different parts, and each of those will have a different theme to it, and as I progress, that'll become clear. I'll try to point things out to you where one theme begins and another one ends. So, what is the Exodus all about? This may seem so elementary to you that, oh my God, this guy's going to tell me about Passover, but allow me these 5 or 6 sentences to sort of make sure we're all on the same level. The Haggadah tells the story of the Exodus of the ancient Israelites from Egypt. It tells us who brought the Israelites out of Egypt, not Moses. It tells us why they were brought out. It tells us that how they were brought out, and not by Moses. The Haggadah tells us that the Haggadah narrative reminds us that the Exodus is the seminal event in Jewish history. It's not about freedom from Egypt and from slavery. It's about freedom to something. Because in Egypt there are harsh laws and regulations, and 7 weeks after the Israelites leave Egypt, they're getting new laws. The 10 Commandments are revealed to them, God's laws are revealed to them, so they're giving more laws. So you're leaving laws, but you're going to more laws, but there's a freedom that one has to exercise, so that it's not about, the Haggadah narrative and the concept of freedom is not about being free from something, it's being free to do something. Why should we work towards freedom? So that we can be free to do and to choose. And Szyk's narrative, or Szyk's commentary, will show us how it is that we have to defend that freedom in every generation, so that the Exodus narrative takes on even greater meaning. As many of you know, we don't just tell this narrative at Passover. We tell it really every day in our liturgy, but every Friday evening when we recite the blessing over wine, the Kiddush, and where we sanctify the holiday. We have 3 key words that are in the Kiddush: Zecher, Yetziat, Mitzrayim. That when we recite the Kiddush, it should be a reminder always of the Exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. So every Friday night we're reminded of that, as we are in our daily liturgy. We're reminded of it as well. So it's an event that permeates and pervades Jewish life completely. But the Passover holiday gives us the opportunity to really reach out to those who are not connected in any way to daily or weekly or commemorations of the meaning of the Exodus from Egypt. So there are different ways to tell this narrative. There are those who choose to tell the narrative by using the Maxwell House Haggadah. And it's got a long, there's no one's ever going to catch up to the Maxwell House Haggadah. There's approximately about 55 million copies of the Maxwell House have been in print. So on the one hand, one can tell this story of the Exodus from Egypt by using the Maxwell House Haggadah, or they can use the Szyk Haggadah. Or they can use, as I see it, and this is totally prejudiced, or they can use the 5,000 other editions or more that exist to tell that story. We're going to tell the story through the Szyk Haggadah. Before we do that, I want to tell you a little bit about Arthur Szyk. He was born in 1894 in Lodz, Poland. By the way, 1894 is when Norman Rockwell was born also. Szyk came to America. I'm going to give you 3 key dates. He was born in 1894. Came to America in 1940. That should answer your visitors' questions about did he ever come to America and escape the Holocaust. And he died in 1951 in New Canaan, Connecticut. So in response to, oh, was Szyk alive today? Arthur Szyk died over 60 years ago. So those would be 3 key dates: 1894, 1940 coming to America, and 1951 dying in New Canaan, Connecticut. When he came to America, he lived in New York on the Upper West Side. When Arthur Szyk was a young boy, teacher, at age 6, it was said that he was already doing drawings of the Boxer Rebellion in China. So interested was he. This Polish Jew in the middle of Poland was concerned about the Boxer Rebellion in China. Was in trade schools, did sketches on his notebooks. His father owned a textile mill in Lodz, where Szyk was born in Lodz, or Łódź. It was a large textile town. His father was in the textile business. His family wanted him to go into the business. Father and mom were convinced that they should send him off to Paris. He went off to Paris as a teenager. He enrolled in the Académie Julienne. Diego Rivera was in the academy at the same time, the Académie Julienne, when Szyk was there. I don't know whether they were friends or not. I have no correspondence between the two. Szyk was in Paris for 2.5, 3 years, 3 years about. A lot of people like to ask, well, who taught Szyk? Where did he get his training from? Well, you can answer it by saying that when Szyk was at the Académie Julienne in Paris, over a 3-year period, he attended only 12 classes. So his training was not coming from the schools he attended. Yes, he did go, yes, in Krakow, he did study with one teacher, but it was very, very short. This was a man who had 2 passions, art and history, and virtually self-taught. And while in Paris, he did go to the Louvre. He did go to the Cluny. He did study illuminated manuscripts, and that was the technique to which he was drawn. As you will know from Szyk's other artwork, he applies that to caricature and cartoon, which we'll talk about later. But he applied it here to illumination, as you see in the Haggadah. After Paris, he went back to Poland, and in 1914 went off to the land of Israel. So he did visit Palestine with a group of writers and artists from Lodz. While there, World War I broke out. He was conscripted into the Russian army. He fled. That's how he survived. Went back to Poland. World War I ended, and Poland then went to war against the Soviet Union. Arthur Szyk became the director of art propaganda for Poland in its war against the Soviet Union. A Polish Jew is the head of propaganda art propaganda for Poland. Szyk became friendly with many of the writers, many of the people in the arts, and in politics. He was incredibly well respected. In the 20s, early 20s, he moved to Paris. He was there for more than a dozen years, illustrated many wonderful books, among them the Book of Esther. After Paris, he returned to Poland in the early 1930s. In 1933, Hitler came to power. And at the end of 1933, Arthur Szyk was invited by the United States government to come to the United States. Now, why would a Polish Jewish artist be invited by the government of the United States to come here? And the answer is because they were going to exhibit works that he had already completed about freedom at the Library of Congress. And Arthur Szyk arrived on a snowy day in 1933. Arthur and his wife Julia came to America. And where did this picture come from? Well, all photographers were at the. It was snowing really hard in December, and there was a huge crowd at the dock to greet Szyk and his wife. People knew about Szyk in America. And so he came here. There was an exhibit held at the Library of Congress. There was one also held at the Brooklyn Museum and also in Cincinnati. And while he was here, the United States government presented him with the George Washington Bicentennial Medal for his works on freedom. This is, by the way, after he had been decorated by Poland and after he had been decorated by France. As France decorated Szyk because they sent him to Morocco to paint the portrait of the Pasha of Marrakesh, and they decorated him for his works on helping create closer relations between France and Morocco. Poland decorated him, and America did too. So in 1934, after here 7 months, Szyk returns to Poland, to Lodz. 1934, he's returning to Europe. Hitler's in power for a year and a half. It is then that Arthur Szyk sits down to begin to illustrate the great book of freedom, the Haggadah. And in 1934 to 1936, he completes all the original paintings for the Haggadah. 1936, after completing them, he moves to London. So he moves to London in 1937, and he lives in London from 1937 to 1940. The Haggadah is printed in 1940 for the first time, more about that. And in 1940, Szyk comes to America. The British government in London and the Polish government, it's now relocated to London. It's called the Polish government in exile. Those two governments support Arthur Szyk coming to America to help bring the face of the war in Europe to the Western world, because he's creating anti-Nazi art while he's in London. It's being published in many, many places. So in 1940, Szyk arrives in America. And I'll say arguably here, but I don't even think it's arguably. Now, so I'll just say it how I feel. Arthur Szyk became the leading anti-Nazi artist in America during World War II. I can prove it, but I'm not going to do it right now. It's another lecture. And by the way, as an aside, because I may not mention this later, I can prove this one too. Arthur Szyk created more art to help bring about the creation of the State of Israel than any other artist. That's another talk. Okay. And in 1940, Szyk comes to America. 1945, the war is over. I'm skipping all of World War II, which is, seminars upon seminars. In 1945, after the war is over, Szyk returns to book illustration, for which he was well known in Europe, and devotes his life to three things. He devotes his life in 1945 to book illustration, to creating his greatest Americana, and number 3 is creating artwork on behalf of the creation of the Jewish state. And in 1951, Arthur Szyk dies of a heart attack at age 57. Here Szyk is greeted when he comes to America, actually into Canada first. famed Polish artist has a price on his head. That's how powerful Szyk's artwork was in Europe. That it said that Hitler put a personal price tag on his head. That's how effective it was. We don't know that the Germans ever did that, but that's what newspapers carried. It just meant people knew who he was. And finally, he was friendly here with Eleanor Roosevelt, among others, and I've not dealt with all the dignitaries and all the people who knew Arthur Szyk. That's an overview of Szyk's life. Okay. Yeah?
But just how did he escape concentration camps?
Well, he went to London in 1937 to supervise the printing of the Haggadah, and but I've used your question to answer another question, and that is that Arthur Szyk's mother and brother were behind in Lodz, and they were taken from the ghetto of Lodz to the Chelmno killing center and murdered there. His father had already died, and Szyk's 2 children left with him, one daughter and then a son who was fighting for the free French.
Which killing center?
Chelmno, Chelmno, was a killing center. It wasn't a concentration camp, but it was a killing center. I don't know how to differentiate a lot of it. So, well, Arthur Szyk went to London in 1937. That's when he went to London to supervise the printing of the Haggadah. And while he was in London, he knew and then teamed up with a man named Cecil Roth. Cecil Roth, many of you will know, is a great Jewish historian. That's his forte. His forte may not have been as a great art historian, although he's written books about Jewish art. But it made sense to have a famous Polish artist who is now in London, and Szyk had visited London before that, and a very famous man in scholarship to combine together to work on a book. And so Szyk and Roth and their families became close while Arthur Szyk was in London. And these are 2 letters, by the way, that are in the exhibition. In one of those letters, while Szyk is working on the Haggadah, he has very little money in London, so he writes a letter to Cecil Roth. And he says to Cecil Roth, that is the letter in 1938, which is here on the left, he says to him, you know, the Haggadah is the work of my life, and I've sacrificed many years of my work, as well as my fortune, which has been very small since the war, to work on in order to do this. And so he's contracted many debts while he's working on the Haggadah in London, or while he's working on supervision of the printing, but he had given up a lot of the work that he had been doing in order to concentrate on the publication. By the way, the British government put Szyk through the ringer in England because they didn't want too many immigrants coming in. And particularly if you were coming in, you had to prove that you were going to work, and you had to prove you were going to help other people out. And I've read all those documents. It's not an easy thing, and it's just as difficult to get into Canada as it was into the U.S. I mean, all over the place. But Szyk, even as a Polish national and a Jew, known people, still had a difficult time in London. And so he supervised the printing of the Haggadah, and it was published ultimately in 1940. This is the binding for the Haggadah. It was printed not on paper. It was printed on vellum. You know, vellum is parchments from a young calf. A Torah scroll is handwritten on vellum. To print on vellum is so very difficult, but to print in color on vellum is extremely difficult, and this book was done in that fashion. It was called by the Times of London, when his Haggadah was first published, a book worthy of being considered among the most beautiful of books ever produced by the hand of man. And I'll say that again later so you can get it all down, but just the idea is that's what was written about Szyk's Haggadah in London in 1940, and when this book was published, only 250 copies were produced. And this book was the most expensive new book in the whole world. And I have a copy of it here. It's in the exhibition. This is the binding. The book sold for $500 in 1940, this book in my hand. Could you buy a house with that? Yeah, you could find it. You could find a house. You could buy one for that. You could buy certainly a car. That's what this book is. And it's printed on some of the finest parchment that one could find, some of the finest skins. They're very consistent, they're beautiful, and I invite you to touch it later, because when it's under showcase in the exhibit, you're not going to be able to touch it. So you might want to do that later. I'll let you do that. But don't bring any drinks over here. This is over a $50,000 book. today. Someone might ask you, and that's what this book is. So am I using gloves? No, I'm not using gloves. You know, that's another issue with the book world. So it was printed in 1940. No popular edition of the Haggadah was printed at that time. Szyk would have liked that, but it wasn't done. So there were 250 copies, 125 for distribution in the United States, and 125 for distribution in the United Kingdom. And the reason I tell you that, small little details, because I don't know how this book's being shown in the exhibition, and it may be open to the page which shows how it's numbered, and it'll say 125, and one of your people who's coming by is going to say, well, I thought there were 250 copies of this book. So there's 125 for England, and it'll say England or United Kingdom, or it may say the United States. The Beaconsfield Press published this book. That's the prospectus for the book. I don't think that's in the exhibition, but who was the Beaconsfield Press? These were friends of Arthur Szyk from Lvov, who put up the money to help start this company in London called the Beaconsfield Press for the purpose of publishing only one book, this Haggadah. And they got financing from Jews in London as well, and the book was published. The book contains 48 pages that were illustrated entirely by Arthur Szyk. Oh, did Szyk do the calligraphy that's on those pages too? The answer is yes, of course. Is this usual that people would do that? No. Usually, when illuminated manuscripts are created, you usually have an artist who does the artwork and a scribe who does the calligraphy. Szyk did both. Now, what also makes this Haggadah unique among all Haggadahs, unique, is that, you know, if you're a well-to-do person in the 16th century, 17th century, you're very well-to-do and you're not quite sure what to do with a lot of your money, you might commission someone to illuminate a Bible for you, or a prayer book, or a book of hours, or some illuminated manuscript that would belong to your family. It would be yours. And that would be the unique copy. Arthur Szyk was not commissioned to create this Haggadah, and he created it as an illuminated manuscript, but for the purpose of reproduction. There are those who will illustrate a book, and it'll be for the purpose of reproduction. Why would someone create an illuminated manuscript that will be mass-produced? And that's what Szyk did. So there's a difference, because in the way in which he created this work. Szyk was fooling around trying to figure out some logo for Beaconsfield Press that might go in the book. This is a preliminary sketch or drawing. I think this is in the exhibition. And in addition to the 48 original works of art that make up the Haggadah, when you open up there is one additional work, which is called the Vorsatz, or sort of like the introduction in a way. When you open up this book, and you won't see this in the exhibition, this is where you will see it as the paste down. When it's on the inside front cover or the inside back cover, it's called a paste down. It's pasted down. Here, I need someone to touch this. Just here. Why don't you touch this? Does that feel like paper? No, it's not paper. This is on silk. It's printed on silk. So I'm sorry I can't bring it up to everyone, but you get an idea of what's going on. Okay? So this is, they spared no expense. Sandgorski and Sutcliffe bound this book. They're the finest book binders in London. It was printed by the Sun Engraving Company, the finest printer in London. No expense was spared to produce this book. And guess what was happening in London in 1940? Bombs were dropping. The Germans were dropping. It was the Battle of Britain taking place, and they're printing this Polish Jew's Haggadah. So he's there when World War II breaks out in September of 1939, and Szyk is supervising the printing of the Haggadah. The way many Jews know Szyk's Haggadah is because they own in their home a velvet-covered one, or some metal binding, not silver plate, just metal. Sometimes it has gems and jewels that are inset. This is blue velvet. It came in a box. It looks like this. This is in the exhibition also. This was printed for the first time in 1956. Szyk died in 1951, so the first time a popular edition of the Haggadah came out was in 1956, printed in Israel. And this was printed by two publishers in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And this is the book that I bought for $18 back in when I got 30 plus years ago. It comes in a box. Oh, people want to know all the time, what's it worth? I don't know what it's worth. Sometimes it's worth $75 or $200, depending on the condition of the box. It's the box it came in. To be distinguished from the box that may or may not be in the exhibition, but they also was a beautiful box that was created in 3/4 leather. 3/4 because the spine and this. When you do that 3/4, if it's all leather, it's completely leather. There's leather on the spine, it's half leather. You don't want to know, you don't have to know those things, but it takes a few seconds to tell you. So the first time the Haggadah was printed in 1956. This was printed again in 1957, 1960, 62, 65, through the 60s, through the 80s, up until 2003. And then there was a new edition that was published, which I published in 2008. And what you're seeing here is what's in this new edition in 2008. This is in the exhibition as well. There's a lot that I can tell you about this, but it's not to, in addition to publishing the book in a companion volume from which these essays are based, I published a book called Freedom Illuminated, Understanding the Szyk Haggadah. These come from that. It's a companion volume to understanding every page in the Haggadah. The companion volume puts Arthur Szyk in context, compares him to other artists. The second essay compares Arthur Szyk's Haggadah to other Haggadahs and analyzes every page in the Haggadah. And the third essay, which I wrote, is a history of this book, how it ever came to be. And this Haggadah has a different translation than the one I showed you in 1940 and the ones in 56, and has a different commentary. Because I really didn't like Cecil Roth's translation and commentaries. Some of you may. I just didn't think he connected all the dots and really, he didn't translate everything of Szyk's. Szyk did a lot of mysticisms in his Haggadah. Roth wasn't into that, so he didn't translate it. Szyk, in terms of Szyk's vigilance, it was played down a bit, and I'm going to show you more about that. Well, so let me just move on now. And here I want to take time to really decode this image so I can show you how you can decode almost any image in the exhibition. You choose the ones that you love. You pick the ones that really excite you. This one really excites me, so I want to talk to you about it. This is the King George dedication page. May I ask you, how many of you saw the movie The King's Speech? Wow. That's the same king, King George VI, to whom Szyk dedicated the Haggadah. That George VI. Now, how do I know that? Well, I know that for a couple of reasons. Here you go. If you look at your, you see this there, you can't see it from where you are probably. There's a G, and there's a Roman numeral 6 underneath it. Right there and there. So you'll look at that artwork, you'll look at your book, and you'll see that's the G to 6. The other thing is that down here, Arthur Szyk signed his name, Lodge, 1936. When did George become king? In December of 1936. When was Arthur Szyk working on the original artwork in Lodge? Between 1934 and 1936. So Szyk completed this dedication page, and then he went off to London. The question is, why would Arthur Szyk dedicate the great book of freedom to King George VI? Well, two reasons. He's going to London to have the book published, dedicated to the king. Second reason is because who in 1936, if you were Arthur Szyk, and among others, who would be at the forefront in your eyes of fighting and standing up to Nazism in Europe? It would be England. Would it be America? No. America's not in the war for 5 more years, and it's not America's concern at that particular point. So Arthur Szyk dedicates this book to the King of England. And what does he say? He says, through his calligraphy, it may be hard for you to make it out, but I'm just going to read it through and you'll study this. At the feet of your most gracious majesty, I humbly lay these works of my hands, shewing forth the afflictions of my people Israel, signed Arthur Szyk, Illuminator of Poland. With the Polish seal here with the 1936 Poland's independence, so there's a crown on top of the eagle here. If Poland was not independent, you were an artist, you wouldn't paint the crown there. The crown symbolizing independence. So Arthur Szyk creates this illuminated page. There's so much going on here, but let me just focus on something that introduces this Haggadah in a way that gives you some idea that this Haggadah is going to be different from all other Haggadahs. And what is taking place here is that after he dedicates this to the king and to England, there's a serious problem. And what is the problem? The problem is that in 1936, when Szyk completed this artwork and dedicated it, England had started to establish and pass a series of white papers that restricted the flow and immigration of Jews out of Europe. The most famous one is the 1939 MacDonald White Paper, but they were started in 1936. How are you going to respond to this if you're Arthur Szyk, both emotionally and intellectually? How are you going to dedicate this great book of freedom to the British, who on the one hand, the Nazis are sweeping through Europe, or beginning the stirrings, the Nuremberg laws have already been passed in 1935, the writing starts to become on the wall. So the Nazi National Socialism is sweeping, anti-Semitism is increasing, but the British are restricting the flow of Jews out of Europe. So if you're Arthur Szyk, how are you going to deal with this? So what Szyk does then is, he paints European Jews here on the bottom right. Now remember, this is a book about the exodus of the ancient Israelites out of Egypt, but Szyk is painting the European Jews who he hopes will exit from Europe. Over here on the British castle gates, he paints the word Zion, standing for the land of Israel, and between the two he paints a British military ship that stands between the Jews leaving Europe and getting to the land of Israel. And that's how Arthur Szyk introduces his Haggadah. Now this is a religious book, but for Arthur Szyk it's more a political book. It's about Jewish survival. How did the king respond when he was presented with the first copy of this book? I have a copy of the response from the king in my library, and that was a letter written by the librarian of the king, King George, and he said to the Beaconsfield Press, who published the book, and Arthur Szyk, that I really love this book, and I keep it by my table, my night table, and I take it out when I'm in Windsor Castle, and for 2 weeks straight I showed it to everybody who came by. The king loved the book. Did the king know what was on this page? Who knows? But that was Arthur Szyk's message. And here he paints a self-portrait of himself leaning against Poland, the seal of Poland, and standing by his people in quasi-military garb, almost as if Arthur Szyk was a soldier in art. Here's the more detail. Okay? And how do I know that's a British military ship and not just like a passenger ship? Well, because then what you do, I've taken this to British military experts. And so they've identified this as a military ship.
Is this where his self-portrait is?
And Szyk's self-portrait's not here. His self-portrait is over there. Yeah, I just took the detail there. So, how is this Haggadah then going to be different from all other Haggadahs? And here then is a response to that, because Arthur Szyk saw Hitler as the new Pharaoh, and the Nazis as the new Egyptians who had come to annihilate the Jewish people. And this is a sketch where he's drawn Hitler looking like Pharaoh, and Goering, the head of the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, right next to him. And this is in the exhibition, not in the Haggadah, but it is in the exhibition. So it's worth taking note. And this was painted by Szyk sometime in the early 1930s. I dated it 1933. I'm pretty sure it's 33 or 34, but it's unsigned and undated. Well, this was drawn as pencil on paper. And the Haggadah was going to be different because what Szyk was going to do was that he was going to paint swastikas on the Egyptians. And he was going to paint swastikas on the snakes. And this is how he was going to show that the Nazis were like the new Egyptians. So in this image, that we were slaves to Pharaoh, you see the Egyptian here in the upper right-hand corner. You see this little thing on his chest. You see these you can't maybe see them here, but these are armbands also. There's an armband on Pharaoh here. There's an armband on those who are accompanying him on their chest. And so what you can see is that underneath the armbands, Szyk had painted swastikas. They were painted over prior to appearing in your book and prior to appearing in the 1940 edition, because nobody in Europe would publish Arthur Szyk's Haggadah with the swastikas. Nobody in Austria in 1937 would do it. And by the way, in 1932, Szyk did have a book published in Vienna on freedom. Nobody in Germany would publish his book in 1937 with the swastikas, and Szyk had a book on freedom published in Munich in 1932. Two great books on freedom published in Europe, in Vienna and Munich in 1932, on the eve of Hitler coming to power. Two books on freedom by a Polish Jew. Two masterpieces, two very expensive portfolios of Szyk on freedom were published in those cities. Nobody's going to publish his Haggadah with swastikas, and no one in Czechoslovakia would touch it. Nowhere. So Szyk painted over them and went to London. So when the first edition was printed, they were printed from the watercolor and gouache paintings that Szyk had created, but you couldn't see the swastika. So how do we get this with the swastika here? How do we know this is here? How do I have this on the screen? It's because when in 2002 there was somebody's going to ask you, how do you know that? In 2002, when there was an exhibition at the United States Holocaust Museum, and a half a dozen originals from the Haggadah were shown, not all of them, because your exhibition is the first exhibition in over 60 years in which the public is going to get to see all of these originals. Over 60 years. No one has seen all of them, except some people privately. Okay. So when an exhibit was held at the Holocaust Museum, they took them. I knew a story. I met a man you can't tell this, but this is how the Holocaust Museum. I met a man in Tel Aviv, an elderly man who was in his 80s, a number of years ago, and he told me that when he was a little boy, Arthur Szyk traveled from Lodz, where he was born, to Lvov, about 200 miles, and carried with him the original artwork of the Haggadah. And this little boy came down the steps in the nighttime while his father, who was the chairman of the board of the committee sponsoring Szyk, and his friends were around the table. This boy came down, he saw the original artwork, and he saw swastikas on the armband of the wicked son. He saw them on the Egyptian, and then fast forward like 7 decades, and I meet this man in Tel Aviv, and he tells me the story. So when I came back to the States, and the exhibit was going to be at the Holocaust Museum, I told them I knew this, and they looked at these under special lighting conditions, and they saw the swastikas on the Egyptians. And here is another image in the Haggadah, a very famous, one of the famous pieces, the 4 questions. Where's the mem in the 4 questions? From Ma, of Ma Nishtana. Somebody might ask. Everybody knows Ma. You see the mem.
I should know this after last week, I hope.
You find it? By the way, how many of you ever went to the dentist's office as a child and had the magazine Highlights? Where you sort of find, yeah, me too. Actually, I was in the physical therapist's office last week. They still have Highlights. And the reason I remember Highlights is because this is where you look for the details and the hidden things. You're going to have a great time with the Haggadah if you ask some of your viewers to try to find these things. Now, I know you're going to be with 10 people or 20 people or 5 people. Everybody's not going to be able to gather around and look close to see the miniature. It's not like having a big painting on the wall. So you're going to develop your own technique. My thing is that if I'm talking to a group and there are a lot of them around, I'll just really be clear. Oh, this is here, this is here. Then when you're leaving, go to the next piece. There's a lot going to stay behind. You're going to watch to try to see what you show them, but they can come back later. It's just, they're miniatures, they're gems. By the way, how large are these? These are only this small, so they're miniatures. Always, Szyk worked in watercolor and gouache, which is an additive to the watercolor. You might want to look up gouache, G-O-U-A-C-H-E, and what it is. Somebody may ask you how he did these, and they were always on paper. Szyk never worked in oils. He never worked on canvas. It's a miniature. So So these are only a few inches high, 7 inches, 6 inches high by 4 inches wide, give or take. Okay? So here, and where's the hay for Ma of Manishtana? Do you know where it is?
In the corner.
Yeah, there it is up there. There's the little hay. And the green thing over here is the Ah of Ma. You see the little green there? And then Nishtana, Halila, Hazem, Mikol, Halila. The 4 questions. Here you have little vignettes. And one of the first times that you'll see Moses, I'm going to talk more about Moses later. And you see the snake is in the upper right-hand corner. Well, the man told me about the snakes, that they had swastikas on the back, the same little brown rondels or circulars there on the back of the snakes. So when I wrote Freedom Illuminated, I put in there it's been reported, or it's thought to be that there were snakes that were swastikas in the back of the snakes. Do you know last year, or during the last 2 years, I got to know Leon Botstein of Bard College. I don't know if anybody knows Botstein. And Botstein told me that his father, and Botstein, by the way, at age 23, was the youngest president of any university in America. I mean, Botstein's the conductor for symphony orchestra in Jerusalem and so on. A pretty prominent guy. So I was in Botstein's home, and he said to me, he said, Irv, you know, he said, my father and my uncle were friends with Arthur Szyk back in Lodz. And we have a few things of Arthur Szyk. How I met Botstein's another story, but I was in, and he said, I want to show you what I have. And guess what he did was, Botstein pulled out this print here that he had. And if you look at this print, what you're going to see is in the upper right-hand corner here, there are swastikas on the back of the snake. And I go, holy you know. And I said, I can't believe it. And he showed it to me, and it's dated Lodz 1936. Because Szyk, on the print, which is a reproduction, not the original artwork, it's a reproduction. See, they did, the beacon, what Szyk did was, before he went off to London, they made some reproductions, a few reproductions of his original artwork, as it was. And those reproductions had swastikas on them. And then Szyk later painted over them, and that's what you see in the book. So what happened is that he shows me this, that it's a presentation to his uncle, who actually fought in the Warsaw Ghetto and died, that Botstein. And then, so we have, so this is in the exhibition.
Is that just a faded?
It's faded. This is faded. It's been in the sunlight, so this calligraphy here, the Hebrew calligraphy, faded. From the print, you know, those prints fade, you put in the sun enough, they fade. Okay?
It was probably a press proof, was that?
Probably what?
Was it a press proof?
I don't know what kind of proof it is. I don't know. It's on the heavier paper. So there you have it, the proof, and you'll see that. So also, on the 4 sons that you'll find in the God, how is the wicked son, when illustrated, normally portrayed in the Haggadah? As a what? As a military figure. Almost always. Here's the 4 sons, which are 4 types of... in Jewish tradition, well, I shouldn't say in Jewish tradition, there's lots of Jewish traditions, but are these 4 people just general people in the world, or does Jewish tradition see this as 4 types of Jews? Do you know? Actually, more so, we see them as 4 types of Jews. They could be 4 types of people, because we're just like everyone else, but I want to make this point particularly, that how is it possible that Arthur Szyk, a Jew, would take a wicked son and paint him looking very Hitler-esque, with a Hitler mustache? And even more so, it was reported that this artwork here is not the artwork that initially was on this painting. In fact, it's reported that this wicked son here had a Nazi armband on him. How is it that one Jew could call another Jew a Nazi? How is that possible? Szyk did it. Why did Szyk do it? Well, Szyk painted this in 1934. And in 1934, there were Jews who were sympathetic to the National Socialists because of economic policies. And these Jews, Szyk saw as the wicked son. And he painted swastika on the armband. I can't prove that swastika was there, but I can prove that there was another work of art in this quadrant here. Why? Because I've examined this original artwork more than a dozen times, and if you turn that artwork over on its back. The recto is the front, the verso is the back. You turn it to the verso, and you take this page here. And by the way, this is Szyk worked on paper that sometimes was used in other projects. So this Four Sons is painted on a piece of paper left over from an earlier printing project. I know which one it was too, but you see, this is here. This is the back. If you take this artwork and flip it over here, then this quadrant is right here. Yeah? And what you're seeing here is remnants of tape here. Here you see other tape, which you may not see from there, which is sort of like a conservator, a higher level of conservation here. And if you hold this up to the light like this, you can see around the edges here, light coming through. So this is a secondary piece. And this is the back of this piece. Okay? So something else was there beforehand on Szyk's Four Sons. The wise son, the simple son, the wicked son, the one who doesn't really give a damn. And in Freedom Illuminated, I have two different people writing about who this fellow really is, and what he's about. You can ask your viewers who this fellow is, what he represents. Is it somebody who's working too much, doesn't have time to be bothered with issues? Is it a ne'er-do-well? Who is this guy? Here, the boots, the riding crop, the feathered hat, the cigar, bourgeois-like, a Jew hater from the outside and inside. Cecil Roth writes about him a little bit in his commentary at the beginning of the Haggadah in his explanation. So it gives you a little bit idea of what's going on here. Actually, okay, I think what I want to do now is turn to, so one of my themes was Hitler as Pharaoh and the Nazis as the new Egyptians. So what I want to turn to now is the idea of that Szyk's Haggadah in the 30s was emphasizing the idea of heroism, not victimhood. For the Jews of Poland and the Jews of Europe in 1934, Szyk is calling upon those Jews to be heroic. And the way in which he does that is he continuously paints heroic figures throughout the Haggadah. I've taken these images from a number of the different works of art, and I put them on one page here, so you get the idea that you begin to see how Jews are portrayed in his Haggadah. Let me also point this out to you, because I'm not sure where I would say this, that in his Haggadah there are religious Jews, there are secular Jews, there are men, there are women, there are Zionists and those who we don't know. Okay? So Szyk is sort of covering the ground, covering all bases here. So here you have a number of ancient Jewish heroes. In this piece here, I didn't point out to you because you have to keep looking and looking at these pieces, and when you do, you'll come back with more and more. You see this soldier here? He has like a menorah on his head, and he's slaying a dragon here. It's almost with the motif of King George slaying the dragon, which represents the slaying of good over evil. And here you have one of the figures here in this page. In this work of art, let me name this. This is Ha-Lachma Anya. This is the bread of affliction. And here you see at the top, bread of affliction. How do you deal with those who are afflicting you? Then you have a warrior here who's fighting a leopard here. I suspect that these also had swastikas painted on the back of them. And I say I suspect because I've not examined all the original artworks under special lighting yet. Despite having been at this for a long time, that takes time too. So there's another thing. And here you have war warriors. Who's in the center here? Who's the center figure? Starts with an M. Moses. Okay, we'll come back to this one later, but here you have more military figures. And here you have another one. I love this image. One of the Psalms. I love that figure. So that is some of the military figures. joined by these fellows here as well. No shortage of them in the Haggadah. Now, are you going to be able to jump around when you're doing exhibit and go from one to no? But you can, when you're at one, you can say, please. You might want to think about where the other images we're going to see, where there are military figures as we go along. Keep that in mind, because Szyk wanted to emphasize the idea of heroism in the Haggadah. And here, the idea of, if you look, here you have Dayenu, and again, David here and David here. And I'll come back to those again. And again, the idea of being heroic, and maybe you could say a little more word about this here. You know, here you have Dayenu. What does David taking off Goliath's head have to do with Dayenu? Or what does David here, having to take off Goliath's head here, have to do with Haggadah? What does that have to do with them? Nothing. But for Szyk has everything to do with these narratives, because, again, it's heroism, and that's emphasized. Now, here, in the midst of beauty here. Now, by the way, I'm very sensitive to this, but I'm also telling you, I have an obligation to tell you what Szyk is showing you in his art. This may not be the kind of Haggadah you might illustrate, but this is what Szyk did. It was very important to his people and to what he was doing in the context to create this Haggadah. You may not like militancy. It may not be for you, but this was for Szyk, and this is Szyk's message. This is what he wanted to deliver. And even in moments of great beauty, of creating the cup of Elijah, Elijah who will be at the bris, Elijah who will come and sit at our Seder table, Elijah who's an integral part of Jewish life, who will resolve all questions. You know, if you have a problem and you can't resolve it with your friend or in business, you know who's going to answer that question for you? Elijah, because at the end of time, Elijah's going to come and resolve all disputes. Well, for Szyk, Elijah also had to deal with slaying Ahab on Mount Carmel, and Szyk doesn't use the opportunity to point that out within the cup of Elijah. And here, again, you have Samuel here, the prophet Samuel, who's slaying the king Agag of the Amalekites, with the idea of this wording here that he's taken from the biblical text: as your sword has made women childless, so will your mother be childless among women. It's pretty gruesome, and it's pretty, I don't know what. You know, the owners of the Haggadah, when I was doing the prospectus for my publication, I had chosen a Haggadah image where David had taken off Goliath's head. She said, oh God, I hate that image. You know, she just had a hard time with it. It's hard to sometimes, but Szyk this was his obligation. Now, I'm going to move to another area that's much lighter, and then I'm going to come back to this. So just take a breath for a second. Okay. Now, I like to do this. I decided that I was going to trace this guy in the Haggadah. I don't know, for fun. I wanted to see how it kept popping up and where he was going. So here, on the order of the Seder, by the way, you know, it goes like this, right down here, then it goes down like this, and like this. He is over here. And then we're going to see where does he pop up in the rest of the Haggadah. By the way, this is something mystical here. Cecil Roth doesn't translate it. It's from Jewish mysticism, and it has to say that before I perform a mitzvah, I need to unite the different aspects of God and bring them into one and concentrate with all my might before I say these prayers. And Szyk knew that. Oh, by the way, someone's going to ask you, what is this text that he's using, all this traditional text, this text that's rather, where did he get it from? Because of the calligraphy he did he not get it from somewhere? And if you are a Jew living in Poland or in Russia in the early part of the 20th century, you were using a traditional text, not a Reformed text, not anyone else. And so that's what Szyk is using. It's a traditional text. Szyk adds things to it. Like, for example, in every traditional text, you don't have Jewish mysticism. Szyk adds that. By the way, someone might ask you, where did he get his Jewish learning from? How does a man do this. How does a man know what images from Jewish legend, from Midrash, from the Bible, how does he know how to do that? Who were his teachers? I don't know. I don't know. But if you can please answer, if I don't know that, maybe you can answer this for me. How does a man like Szyk do a whole history of Canada from its beginning to the present, a whole history of China in his artwork, and I can show you those artworks, from the beginning to the end? How does a man do a whole series of paintings on Liberia? How does a man do artwork, illustrate over 50 paintings for Arabian Nights entertainments, and do the Arabic calligraphy? On the Chinese, how does he do all of the Chinese calligraphy? How does this man learn the whole sweep of history, illuminating, being as conversant with Peter the Great and Joan of Arc as he was with King Yagiwu of Poland? How does a man learn all of that? How does he do all that? How does he assimilate all the knowledge that he's amassed? I can't answer that. And I cannot answer for you. I do not know who his teachers were, who taught him Hebrew calligraphy. And let me just simply say this, and maybe this won't pertain to you, but it's just putting this in giving you this information. And that's this, is that when I was in Jerusalem about in 2009, and I was showing the Haggadah, a man walked up to me with a black coat. It was the blackest black coat you ever saw. And he had a black hat, and it was the darkest black hat you ever saw. And he had a black beard. And not only was it the blackest black beard, but it's really long. And he walked up to me, and he said to me, "That's Arthur Szyk's Haggadah, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah," because I was like, man, how does this guy know Szyk? How does he know that? He says, "I know who Arthur Szyk is." I said, "Yes." He says, "Let me tell you something." He says, "When I look at the calligraphy of Arthur Szyk, and I know that he was not religious," and Szyk was not religious. He says, "I know that Szyk was not religious." He says, "But every time I look at the calligraphy in Szyk's Haggadah, I know that this was a Jew with a very, very deep Jewish heart." So I share that with you just because I wanted to share it.
Can we just pause on this moment for a second, because I know this came up in our training about the calligraphy. Like, would a secular-ish Jew in Poland at that time have been reading and writing Hebrew as part of kind of general studies? Would he have had a religious education? I think that's something that, or did he take this on as he was illustrating the Haggadah?
Well, let's just put it this way. You have yeshivas that are all around. I mean, you could go to yeshivas and you could learn and you could master that. Szyk was not in any yeshiva. Szyk was going to trade schools as a kid. He was not going to Jewish schools. But but his ancestors, his father from whom he's descended, he may have been from the famous Katzenellenbogen family. There's some belief that he was descended from great families. We don't know that. We did do a paper here about his genealogy and stuff, so you could check that out. Yeah, quick question?
It's not a question, it's actually a comment.
Comment. I have time for a comment.
You know, my father was from Poland, of this descent,
Okay.
and my father did calligraphy, very, very similar to his. And I think to myself that, you know, for my father, it was his art. It's how he expressed art in the calligraphy.
Through calligraphy.
Yeah.
Well, there's that idea, you know, that the man in Jerusalem was sharing with me what you're saying would come together then. So here's the fellow again. Here he is there, or he might be at the table. Look at this, is wonderful. I love this Baruch. Here begins the Kiddush, by the way, in the middle of this page. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol. Well, the blessing over here, Baruch Goffin, is right up here. Okay? And so the fellow here continues here. He's one of these fellows over here, and he's one of these fellows over here. I love this walnut. If you get a chance to look at this, when you look at this original artwork and you see the beautiful purples that are coming through, it's wonderful. And what I want to do now is to take up the theme that in each and every generation they stand against us. which is in the Haggadah. It's part of the Haggadah text. And here you can see in each and every generation they stand against us to destroy us. But Shebachol Dor Vador Omdim Aleinu. In every generation they stand against us. So how is Szyk illuminating this text? How is he dealing with this? And so what you see here is that these are all the nations throughout history who tried to annihilate us. And Szyk is putting them all within this image here. That despite the fact that you have the Jew who's continuing from previous ones, who stands up here ready to make a blessing over the wine, you have over here two symbols. These are the symbols of Castile and Leon. This represents the Spanish Inquisition here. Down here, when you look at the artwork close up, and you can't see it right here, Haman is on the helmet here. That is Persia. You'll see here of the face down here of an Assyrian king. You'll see over here the double-headed eagle of Tsarist Russia. You'll see over here, you can't, I say you see over here, you can't see over here from where you are, but it's here. And you can see it in the Haggadah, SPQR, which is the population and the Senate of Rome. It really represents the government of Rome. And so here it represents Rome in its attempt to destroy the Jewish people. All of this, and cannons are up here. Despite all of this, and while in iconography, oftentimes in anti-Semitic iconography, the snake is used to represent the Jew, Szyk is showing this serpent winding around here, which probably would have had swastikas on its back too. And despite all these attempts that in every generation there are those who stand against us to annihilate us, still with all of that, God's moral law prevails, and that the Jews still can raise the cup and celebrate, despite all of this, in God's promise. So I really like this piece an awful lot. I think it's got a message to teach. The theme of the next sort of subject area that I think Szyk is constantly repeating in the Haggadah is that of Amalek. The idea that when the Israelites were in the wilderness, it was Amalek, the Amalekites, who attempted to kill the Hebrews, and that Amalek exists in every generation. Do I want to pause now? Maybe yes. Yeah, just show you. Szyk illustrated the book of Esther twice. Once in 1925, and this is not an exhibit, but you should know that, and again in 1950. He died before the 1950 version came out. It was published in 1974, Book of Esther. Here's a picture of Haman hanging on the gallows. What Szyk painted on him? Can you see? What do you see? Little symbols. Well, what's that? Yeah, he painted swastikas, and this book was printed with the swastikas. You see, Haman here is hanging on the gallows. Szyk is down here. There's a self-portrait of Szyk here. Down here is Zini and Hamantashen. Right? Haman's hanging on the gallows, and he's got swastikas on him. Right? So Szyk painted swastikas on figures. You know, because for him, even though the war was over, this is 1950, Amalek exists in every generation. And there's a legend that Hitler was descended from Amalek, which sometimes you see that written about in various publications. No one can prove that, but it's the idea of identifying evil with Amalek. Well, Szyk does it all the time in Haggadah. Let's take a look. In the same image here, here you'll take a look. Here you will look at the idea that that what I pointed out before about Samuel of slaying the king of the Amalekites here, Agag is the king of the Amalekites. Right up here, what's going on is, if you look at this in your Haggadah, the first word is Ma. You might think that it's like the four questions, that he's that their father or grandfather is teaching the children, but not. It's the text from the Bible, the calligraphy, which is, "You shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heaven. Do not forget." And so that idea is there. You also see it again, because what I showed you here of Elijah slaying Ahab, Szyk has written that same Hebrew text from here. Szyk has also put it again here on the bottom. And the whole idea is that the text here, again, the Lord will be at war with Amalek in every generation. It's really serious business for Arthur Szyk, this Haggadah. I mean, it's made, I don't know, there are those who are sometimes not comfortable with his art, there may be those who are sometimes, but Szyk was interested in Jewish survival. I mean, for the Jews of Europe in the 1930s, he was deadly serious. And the reality was, there were those who were attempting to annihilate the Jewish people. So Szyk had to emphasize this. This had to be known. And he worked it in. Look, you see this image here? In 1944, when the war is on, he takes this image here. Note these figures. Who is this man with the breastplate here? Hint, Moses' brother, Aaron, and Hur, the warrior. This is painted in 1935, I think. 35 or 36, I think 35. And in 1944, he paints this image of a modern Moses during the war. But instead of Aaron here, look who's here. And instead of Hur, it's a resistance fighter. And the Jewish soldier with a talit here. And this became known as modern Moses, and was an artwork that was distributed by one of the committees that Szyk was a member of during the war, called the Emergency Committee to Save the Jewish People of Europe.
You're saying Hur?
Oh, H-U-R.
Is that Ben-Hur?
Well, no, his son would be Ben-Hur. And so, these are some of the images that demonstrate the concept of Amalek. And here you have the idea that, again, another warrior, a leading nation is Amalek, but its fate is to perish forever. And here is the idea, this is, maybe what I should do is use this as a way of transitioning to another concept that's in Szyk's Haggadah. And if I can find it, well, can anybody tell me where the scales are in this image? Top third, middle third, or bottom third? Bottom third. Here's scales. Why would there be scales in Szyk's Haggadah? What do the scales represent?
Justice.
Justice. Scales represent justice. So already, here you have Amalek, and the idea that it has to be dealt with justice. Justice is a very important, deeply rooted concept for Arthur Szyk. Look, again, here you have King Belshazzar, in the book of Daniel. It's not, I don't know, I wouldn't talk much about the book of Daniel to your visitors, but here you have Belshazzar, the words on the wall, about death that are here. But again, Szyk, you see up here, again, scales, justice has to come to this king. And again, Szyk paints him, and he paints Belshazzar here because within the context of this hymn, or this psalm, Belshazzar's name appears, so Szyk paints it. And here, again, in the top third, the middle third, or the bottom third, I don't know, I'm just being arbitrary, you see scales. Well, hard to see from where you are, but there are some scales that are in here, again, in Haggadah, in justice. I don't know how you can relate Haggadah to a secular audience or to even Jewish audience, but here comes the kid's bit by the cat, and the cat by the dog, and the dog by the stick, blah, blah, blah. It's like the house that Jack built. Maybe some people could identify with that in relating Haggadah to that. But anyhow, scales are here. The reason the dot is underneath, because this is like a instead of a Haggadah, it's a Haggadah. And scales again here, they're down here, okay, in the French dedication page. So you might want to look for scales throughout the Haggadah. By the way, this is Judith, who's not in the Bible, in the Apocrypha. Judith is taken off the head of Holofernes here. And in order to do that, she used his sword. And at the end of the sword, this is again painted over, but somehow, back in the 1940s in the United States, it reappeared in a journal, and the swastika was appeared. I have no idea how that happened, but but there's a same sort of coloring, and roundel is on the end of the Holofernes sword. So, for Szyk's Haggadah, justice and retribution will ultimately prevail. And he sees Jewish militancy and activism, of which David and Moses are paradigmatic models, as the primary vehicles for meting out justice to the foes of the people of Israel. And Byron Sherwin is the author of the commentary on the Haggadah that you've been using. So here's Moses. You know, is Moses' name in the Haggadah? No, Moses' name doesn't appear in the Haggadah at all. Actually, it does appear in one psalm, but in the text, in the Haggadah text, Moses' name is not there. So what happens is that there are illustrators who have put Moses back into the Haggadah. I don't know, I haven't counted what everyone else has done, but I know Szyk has painted Moses at least 8 or 9 times in his Haggadah. Why would Szyk do that? Because, first of all, why wasn't Moses' name in the Haggadah at all? And that is because the rabbis who created the Haggadah over the centuries decided that it should be God totally who took us out, who redeemed us, who lifted us out of Egypt, who carried us on his back to bring us out of Egypt. People should not be worshipped. We should know where Moses is buried. We should know that Moses had done that. God did that. Szyk believed that, like many, that a partnership has to be between man and God, and that people need to be involved in the affairs of man, and that even more so, Szyk needed Jews not to rely on God, but to rely on their heroes to help take them out of the situation that they were in Europe in the 1930s. And so he painted Moses as that model, as that hero to whom Jews could look as a military figure. For when Moses was in the wilderness, he, among other characteristics in terms of being a religious leader, and he was seen as a military leader by Szyk. And I'll be very clear about how that happens too. Here Moses strikes the Egyptian. This is the image that appears in the Haggadah. But also in the exhibition, what we've shown is that in the year before, he painted this image. And it also has French titling. I think Szyk thought that before he came to the United States in late 1933-34, that he was thinking about a Haggadah. Well, he was, because he painted this Moses striking the Egyptian in the 1920s. And the reason this is in the exhibit, and this gives you an opportunity to teach something that no one knows, is that Arthur Szyk was working on his Haggadah in the 1920s. And it was an entirely different style, as you can see from here. And he painted a lot of works of art for the Haggadah in the 1920s. But then what happened was he stopped and he began to create another artwork at the time which he thought was more important than the Haggadah in the 1920s. It was called the Statute of Kalisz, K-A-L-I-S-Z. Statute meaning laws, Kalisz being a town in Poland, a town in which in the year 1264, Boleslav the Pious granted civil and religious privileges to the Jews of Europe. It was probably the most welcoming place in all of Europe for Jews in the 13th century. Now, 13th century to 1600s, Jews are kicked out of England and can't live in England for 300 years. They're being kicked out of France, they're being kicked out of Germany, Jews are going to Poland. Poland granted civil and religious liberties to the Jews in Poland. Szyk thought that was important. in the 1920s. So he illuminated all of those laws that granted civil and religious privileges to Jews, and he published this. And it was published in Munich in 1932. That's what he started to work on. And in late 1920s, freedom was so important to Szyk that he started working on another portfolio called Washington and His Times. In Poland, Szyk learned all of American history in the 1920s and completed 38 paintings of Washington and the American Revolution. Guess what?